doing tonight? I hope this is a loud enough voice for tonight. I don't know how quiet I am, so please tell me if I'm too quiet or if I need to turn on the music. Welcome in. Happy Sunday. We're going to be doing some history reading tonight. I'm not sure if I've set up my mic properly or not, so I guess it's up to you guys to tell me. Is the music too loud? It might be. Music's too loud for my voice. Okay. Is this better? I hope so. Welcome into Coffee Talk, where we are going to talk and drink coffee and read historical tales. And since it's Coffee Talk, I thought I would make my coffee on stream. Putting my creamer in. I want to open up my sugar. I'm gonna mix it together. That's our coffee made. Welcome in. How are we doing? Happy Sunday, everybody. It's a blessed day. Or a cursed day, depending on your opinion on ASMR. This might be the worst thing ever. I'm not sure. But we'll see. It's Max. That's me. Hello. Welcome in. Am I too quiet? Do I need to bump my volume up a little bit? Is this a bit better? Or is it too loud? I don't know. Should I be whispering like this in your ear? Do you like this better if I'm like this? I don't know which way you guys want me to talk. So, you might be asking yourself, Max, why are you doing ASMR? And the answer to that is, a long time ago I had a stream where we had a goal for ASMR and I never did it. So I'm doing it now. I also got some seaweed chips. So I hope you guys like this. Here it goes. That's crunchy. Seaweed chip good. Very good. Very crispy. Hang on, let me have another one. Very crispy. Very crunchy. How was everyone's day today? Is the mic okay for everybody? Or is this annoying? I don't know. I guess you wouldn't be here if you didn't like ASMR, so I guess am I doing it right so far? Am I too loud? Are we nice and cozy inside of our nice little lit room? Delicious coffee. I put caramel macchiato creamer in there. It was very nice. Shitty morning, but being irresponsible and Humble Bundle to make it up for it. I see. Please don't spend all your money. Please do not lose all your money. Okay. Well, if you guys aren't aware of what's happening tonight, we're going to be reading historical tales and also yapping for a bit. So, I hope you guys enjoy. I don't know how long I'm going to read for. Maybe 2 hours? Maybe a little bit longer? I don't know. Depends on how we do tonight. I don't know how many people are actually interested in ASMR here on the channel, so maybe it's a new avenue for us to open up. However, as a history teacher, I feel it's my responsibility to teach you some historical tales. So I'm going to be reading some of my favorites that are obviously like open to the public. I'm going to stop the music for a little bit. I hope, is the rain okay? Does the rain sound fine? Does it need to be a little bit louder? What do we think? And while you think about it and write down your answer, I'm going to these are so good. Only 30 calories in a pack. And 1 gram of protein. Quite good, if you ask me. Good trade-off, and they're very crispy. Rain sounds seem fine to me, at least. Very good. Sorry, I really like these. I'm so sorry. Okay. Well then, without further ado, shall we get to reading? Let's see. We have a few options for what we want to read. They're from Project Gutenberg, which is a site, projectgutenberg.org. Excuse me, Gutenberg.org. So we have Hero Tales from History by Smith Burnham A.M., head of the Department of History, Western State Normal School, Kalamazoo, Michigan. Copyright 1922, by the way. Very old book. So some of the words in this might be a little bit old-timed. So if I'm reading something and it seems out of place or incorrect, it's probably why. Let's start off by reading about Moses, the great lawgiver and the meekest man. Long ago in the land of Egypt, there lived as slaves to the Egyptians a race of people called the Hebrews. There were so many of them that the Egyptians began to be afraid that they would overrun the land. So the cruel king, or the pharaoh, as he was called, commanded that all the baby boys of the race should be thrown into the Nile River. But one little child escaped this fate, for his poor slave mother disobeyed the king and hid her baby in a hut. When he was 3 months old, his mother was afraid she could not keep him quiet any longer. So she made a basket, plastered it inside with pitch, said it would be watertight and float like a boat. Into this boat she put her baby. The mother sent the strange little boat on the edge of the Nile River, among the tall reeds called bulrushes, very near the place where she knew the king's daughter came every day to bathe. It was a cool spot, well guarded and safe from the terrible crocodiles that lived in the Nile. After making sure that the little boat would not sink, the mother went back to her work, leaving her daughter Miriam to see what became of her baby brother. Just as the wise mother had planned, the princess soon came with her ladies-in-waiting and spied the cradle rocking on the waves near the shore. She told one of her maidens to bring it to her. The king's daughter knew too well of her father's command to drown or kill all the baby boys of Hebrew slaves. So when she found a baby crying there, she pitied the poor mother who had obeyed the king by putting him in the river, still fondly hoping to save his life. When the pharaoh's daughter saw the babe, she said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." There was a pleading look in the face of the little child. He seemed to ask the princess to take him in her arms. The princess herself was married, but she had no children. That baby, smiling through his tears, touched her mother heart. How could she help saving his little life from his father, or from her father's cruel law, by claiming as her own? Just then, Sister Miriam bowed before the princess and said, Shall I go and call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee? The king's daughter was pleased, and said, Yes, go. So the happy sister ran and brought her mother to the great stone palace of the pharaohs. Then the princess said, as if the mother were only a child's nurse, Take this child away and nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages. So besides saving his life, that mother was royally paid for taking care of her own son instead of working as a slave out in the hot sun. Besides, she had a good chance to tell him, as he grew up, of the one true God. What if her boy should save his father's peoples from slavery? When he became a man in the palace of the pharaohs, in due time, the daughter of the king adopted the young Hebrew as her own son, and named him Moses, which means saved. I almost turned it off. Sorry, guys. Because she had rescued him out of the river. When Moses was old enough, he went to live with his royal mother, where he was educated in all the wisdoms of the Egyptians, who at the time, nearly 4,000 years ago, were the most learned people in the world. Although he studied in the college of the priests, who believed in the sun, the moon, and many other gods, Moses never forgot what his mother had taught him about the true God. Young Prince Moses had a great deal to do while he was growing to manhood. He is said to have been commander-in-chief of the Egyptian army that conquered the races living 1,000 miles up the Nile. In the Bible are these words, And it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown, that he went out unto his brethren, and looked on their burdens. He spied Egyptians smiting an Hebrew, one of his brethren. And he looked this way and that way, and when he saw there was no man, he slew the Egyptian, and hid him in the sand. Now when Pharaoh heard this, he sought to slay Moses, but Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh, and dwelt in the land of Midian. This Pharaoh was not the father of Moses' foster mother, who was now dead. It is said that the king was afraid Moses would drive him from the throne and become Pharaoh himself. And for 40 long years, the exiled prince lived in Midian, studying, planning, and writing. It was during this time that he made the greatest decision of his life. He resolved to save his own people, the millions of Hebrews who were slaves to the Egyptians. At last, Moses and his brother Aaron appeared before the Pharaoh, and announced that God had demanded that the king should let the children of Israel go free. It was a hard thing to ask, for the Egyptians still needed the great army of slave men to build great pyramids and temples. The king refused and consented, and then refused again, until plague after plague was set upon the land of Egypt. At last, when the king's own son and the oldest child of every Egyptian family in the whole country had died in one night, the terrified and the heartbroken king called for Moses and Aaron by night, and said, Rise up and get you forth from among my people. Both ye and the children of Israel go. And the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading troughs being bound up in their clothes upon their shoulders. This going out of the Hebrew people bound for the Promised Land nearly 4,000 years ago is called the Exodus. To this day, it is celebrated by the Jews every year as the Passover. When the Pharaoh realized the great stone temples and pyramids of Egypt might never be finished, he was afraid because he had let the slave people go. So he ordered out of his horses and chariots and drove hard after them until he caught them in camp beside the Red Sea. The frightened Hebrews began to cry and accuse Moses of deceiving them and leading them out into a great trap to be killed like 1,000,000 helpless sheep by Pharaoh's army. But Moses told the wailing crowds not to be afraid, before the king's horse and men caught up with them as a strong east wind came up and kept the tide from running in, thus leaving bare sandbar right in front of them across that arm of the Red Sea. Moses commanded the people to march over as on dry land, an order which they lost no time in obeying. Then the Pharaoh and his horsemen came up behind and drove hard after them upon the sandbar, but the heavy chariots stuck in the mud beneath the sand. And when the Egyptians reached the middle, the wind changed, and the tide, which had been held back for so long, rushed in and drowned Pharaoh and his army. Then Miriam and Moses and Aaron led these 1,000,000 freed slaves in a great, grand victory chorus of song about the hair-breadth escape. But the people were always scolding and complaining against Moses, the dear, gentle leader who had saved them from their cruel bondage. It was his patient love for his thankless people, while through 40 years they wandered in the wilderness, that gave Moses the name of being the meekest man that ever lived. At Mount Sinai, Moses received from God and gave to the people the Ten Commandments written on the tablets of stone. He spent his time during the long years of wandering in the wilderness and planning the laws and religion for his beloved people. He himself never entered the promised land, but died in the wilderness, somewhere on a mountain called Nebo. The Bible makes this statement of his death. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there, and he buried him in a valley. But no man knoweth of his sepulchre until this day. There you go. There's part one. I think I'm going to read something a little bit later after these all. I think we're going to read something about Socrates next. Oh, there's Moses. There you go. What'd you guys think of that? I hope you understood it. I know my reading's not very good, so. Okay. Alright, let's go on to the next story. Shall we? The next story is called Socrates, the Grand Old Man of Greece. Oh, thank you for following Klein the Clarinetist. Socrates was the son of a sculptor of Athens in the day of Pericles, a ruler who encouraged art, culture, and made his city famous for its learning and beauty. As a boy, Socrates was taught by his father to carve statues. Nearly 1,000 years afterwards, a traveler in Greece described a group of figures called the Graces, carved by the youthful Socrates. But the young man was not satisfied with being a sculptor. While he was working at his carving, his active mind kept trying to find out the reason for everything. In Athens at this time, there were not only many painters and sculptors, but numbers of men called philosophers, who gave all their time to thinking out the meaning of what they saw in the world around them, trying to teach the meanings to such people as would listen to them. These philosophers differed widely from one another in their views. Some of the things that they thought would seem very queer to us today, but they were doing their best to find out the truth. Welcome and happy first-time chatter. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for the follow. Enjoy your time. This is our first time doing ASMR, so please enjoy. A group of philosophers who held the same views was called a school. These schools of philosophy were not like the schools of today. They were simply gathering places in someone's house, or on a street corner, or on a public porch, or in a grove where men who think came together for talk and debate. Instead of children sitting quietly at desks, a school was made up of grown men walking about and talking a great deal. Socrates found that he was much more interested in listening to what the philosophers thought than he was in carving statues. So he gave up his work with his father and went out to visit the schools. But as he went from one school to another, he could see that no one of them was right in every way. He decided that he could not learn the real truth from them, so he resolved to walk the streets and ask questions of the people he met there. He was so anxious to know what he could learn from anyone who he talked to, whether men or women or even children. He met many men who thought they were philosophers when they were not, for it was considered a great thing to be known as a famous thinker, and all men aimed at it. When Socrates met a man who claimed to be wise, he would ask questions as if he himself did not know anything, and he would thus lead on from one thing to another, till sometimes he made the man say the very opposite of what he had said before, making him ashamed of himself. This way of drawing out the truth by questions and proving the wrongness of some ways of reasoning is known today as the Socratic method. The Greeks were great believers in beauty. They thought whatever is beautiful must be right. But Socrates saw handsome men and beautiful women leading wrong lives, and he made such people angry by saying so. Socrates himself was far from handsome. He was short and thick-set. His head was bald, and his eyes bulged out in a comical way. His nose was broad and flat. His lips were thick, and his ears stood out, making him look like the clowns of the Greek the Greek comedies, laughed at in the great outdoor theaters. More than this, Socrates was poor. He had learned while a young man that those who had most of the so-called good things of life were the most unhappy. So he made up his mind that the best kind of wealth lay not and not wanting much. He did not care for good things to eat. He went barefoot and wore the same thin garment both summer and winter. The Greeks were fond of art for the sake of art. Socrates believed in right living and loved art only for heart's sake, for the sake of doing good and making people happy. He also believed that to know is to live, and that in order to live right, one must first know what is right. He claimed to have a certain force or voice within him which showed him what was right. He was the first of all the wise men of the heathen world to believe that this inner light should be a correct moral guide to right living. Even the gods the Greek worship did things of the worst kind. They were spiteful, cruel, and wicked. So the people did not think it wrong to act as their gods did. They did not understand what Socrates meant when he said he had a voice within him, which told him what he should do or should not do. So they thought he was trying to make them believe in a strange new god, when they had too many already. Socrates was a great lover of his country. When the Greeks went to war, he went in the ranks as a private soldier and fought like a hero. In one battle, he saved the life of a rich, handsome, brilliant young man who was very popular in Athens. This youth soon learned to love the homely old scholar and studied with him. Two other great men were pupils of Socrates. One of these became one of the greatest historians, and the other a great philosopher. They were both authors, and they wrote all that is known today about Socrates, who did not leave any writings to show what he believed and taught. Of course, most people failed to understand Socrates, and so they made him the laughingstock of the town. Yet many young men, led by the youth whose life Socrates had saved, came to him to learn how to live and be useful and happy. But the people who were jealous of his influence over the young men of the city accused the old philosopher of teaching them of their gods, and thus corrupting their minds. They had him arrested, but his students followed him to the prison, where he kept on teaching them the right way to live. Socrates was tried by a law court of citizen judges and defended himself very ably. Very ably. This is written in very old English, so I'm sorry if I mess up some of the words. The story of his bold defense is told in a book called The Apology of Socrates by a famous Greek writer named Plato. He spoke of his aim to show people how little they knew so that they might learn more, and told his judges that he intended to go in the same way if they spared his life. He was condemned to die, however, and 30 days after the trial, they gave him a cup of poison called hemlock to drink. After he had taken this, he went on talking to his students of the hope of a happier life beyond the grave. This was 400 years before the birth of Christ. Socrates came nearer the Christian belief than any other philosopher of the ancient time who had no knowledge of the Bible and its teaching. This is such an interesting book to read because it's written so long ago. Everything is kind of got this very interesting Christian tilt to it because it's from the 1920s. So you're a history teacher? That's really cool. I studied angelology. What is that? Angelology and geography during my free time. Sometimes history and those topics go together. It's a cool thing to learn. I'm a cartographer in my private life. I teach history here only. So I'm very well versed in geography as well. This is so interesting. This is a very interesting book that we're reading here. Let's see, who should we read about next? That was Socrates. So we've read Moses, we've read Socrates. How about one of the greatest conquerors of the ancient world, shall we, chap? Let's read about Alexander, the boy who conquered the world. Alexander was the son of Philip, king of Macedon, a country to the north of Greece. His father was a great general as well as a king. Young Alexander was a strong, active, handsome lad. The story is told of his breaking a wild horse which had been presented to Philip by a neighboring king. This horse was named Bucephalus, the Greek word for bull-headed. He reared, bit, snorted, and pawed the air if anyone tried to mount him. King Philip was indignant at being given such a present and was about to send back the bull-headed beast as too dangerous to the life or limb of anyone who attempted to ride him. But Alexander noticed that the horse was frightened even at his own shadow, He begged his father to let him conquer such a splendid animal. The lad was so much in earnest that the king decided to let him try. The young prince showed no fear as he walked up beside Bucephalus, patted him on the neck. He wanted to keep the horse from being frightened, as his fright was the cause of his wildness. By degrees, the boy managed to turn the great brute's head towards the sun, so that he could not see his shadow. Throwing off his velvet mantle, Alexander suddenly sprang on the horse's back. Instead of trying to restrain or guide the frightened steed, the boy let him go as fast as he could across the plain. When Bucephalus grew tired, the shrewd rider began to turn his head away, and that, while speaking kindly and patting him soothingly. When they returned from their long run, Bucephalus obeyed the prince's word, and touch as a gentle, well-trained horse should. It is said that the huge beast learned to kneel for Prince Alexander to mount, and that he carried his young master proudly through many a battle. The king was so pleased with the courage and wisdom Alexander displayed in conquering Bucephalus that he said to his son, "You should have a larger kingdom. Than Macedon to rule." As if to fulfill his wish, Philip went to war with several of the neighboring kings and left his 16-year-old son to rule over Macedon while he was absent. Then Alexander was allowed to command certain companies of the Macedonian army. In this, he showed wonderful courage and wisdom. Philip, his father, was murdered when Alexander was 20. Then the kings whom the father had conquered tried to throw off the rule of Macedon. They said, "This new king is only a boy." But Alexander answered when he heard it, "They think I am a boy. I will show them that I am a man." And he did, not only by defeating the kings and armies his father had beaten, but by conquering the other states around Macedon whose kings had turned in to help Alexander's enemies. At this time, the greatest monarch in Asia was Darius, king of the Persians. He sent several nobles of his realm to seek the friendship of Alexander, king of Macedon. These men were surprised when they saw that the young ruler was not interested in their stories of the wealth and splendor of the vast countries of Darius. Instead, Alexander wished to hear about the extent of their kingdom, about its different peoples, and about the location of the rivers, roads, and cities. The men from Persia said to members of the court of Macedon, "Our old king is rich, but your young king is great." Alexander, both king and general, had a strange thirst for power. He left a true friend in control of his kingdom in Europe and started east, with only a small army, to conquer the vast countries of the continent of Asia. King Darius laughed at the very idea of a mere boy with so few soldiers coming to conquer him and the greatest, richest empire in the world. He came to meet the Macedonian army with an armed host about 10 times as large as Alexander's. And that boy soon routed and scattered the hosts of the Persians, and King Darius had to fly for his life, leaving his wife and her mother behind as Alexander's prisoners. The young conqueror was kind to those and to all other prisoners of war. This was wholly different from the custom then, for ancient conquerors killed or made slaves of those whom they defeated in battle. Alexander gained 2 great victories over Darius and captured other kingdoms and walled cities after long sieges and hard-fought battles. While in Asia, he came to a temple where there was a puzzle which no one had solved. This was a strange knot in a long leather strip. This knot, has been prophesied for centuries, could not be undone except by the one who was to conquer Asia. Alexander felt that he must unloose this terrible tangle in some way or another. So, when he was brought to the temple, which was at a place named Gordium, he took his sword and cut through the knot. Ever since then, when anyone meets and solves in a surprising way what seems to be an impossible problem, he is said to have cut the Gordian knot, as Alexander did in the temple at Gordium. The young conqueror marched down into Africa and not only took possession of Egypt, the greatest kingdom of that vast region, but built near one of the mouths of the wide river Nile, a city to which he gave his own name. That city, Alexandria, is still one of the largest cities in the continents of Africa. It became necessary for Alexander to leave his army eastward into Asia, after his great successes had begun to indulge his appetites in eating and drinking and in other harmful ways. Once, in a fit of drunken rage, he killed his best friend. This made him ashamed and sad when he came to himself and realized what he had done. Because of his many victories, Alexander is called the Great. When he was only 26, he conquered all the important nations in the world of this day. It was because he had now nothing to strive for after he gave way to evil passions. He is said to have wept because there were no more worlds to conquer. He became ill and died as a result of his excess, leaving no children or relative to rule over the great kingdoms he had acquired. Although Alexander the Great had conquered the world, he could not govern himself. Hundreds of years before his day, Solomon, the wise, rich king, wrote in the Proverbs, "He that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that ruleth his spirit than he that taketh the city." And there you have it. There's the tale of Alexander. There is another thing that I do want to read about Alexander, though. There's a thing called the Speech at Opus, which I would like to read for you all. I believe. Something I've been looking at is Posthumans. It's cool, but it actually really scares me. Kind of embarrassing to say. I don't look at it much just because it's outside of what I really love researching, but it's also something cool. I see. Let me see if I can find an actual... Here's the context for the speech, right? It's 324 BC. We're in Opus in Mesopotamia. Macedonian soldiers had mutinied after Alexander integrated Persian troops and adopted certain Persian customs to make sure that they felt welcome into the army, and they felt replaced. So, they decided they were going to rebel against their commander. Alexander says this, and this is just what we believe he said, based off of things that we've seen. "You say that I dismiss you, that I prefer foreigners to the men who marched with me from Macedon. Listen carefully. When my father found you, you were wanderers in skins, your flock threatened by Illyrians and Tribalians, your land small, your name unknown beyond your mountains. It was Philip who gave you cloaks instead of hides, discipline instead of disorder, cities instead of scattered villages. He made you feared among your neighbors. And when I succeeded him, I found enemies on every side. You marched with me into Asia. You crossed the Hellespont. You stood with me at the Granicus, at Issus, at Gaugamela. Together we overthrew the Persian king. Together we took Babylon, Susa, Persepolis. I did not claim these victories alone. I shared them with you. Who has received greater rewards than you? Who has been enriched with more spoils? Who among you has not returned home bearing gold, horses, armor, honors? When you were wounded, did I not stand beside you? When you buried your dead, did I not grieve with you? I have not kept myself apart from hardship. I have endured thirst in the deserts of Gedrosia. I have crossed rivers in armor. I have bled as you have bled. If I have taken Persians into my ranks, it is not to dishonor you, but to rule what we have conquered. Shall we hold Asia with Macedonians alone? Shall we command millions with a few thousand? No. I seek not to replace you, but to bind all under one empire. If you believe yourself wrong, if you think I have failed you, then take your discharge, go home. Tell them that you abandoned your king in the midst of his enemies. As for me, I will remain with the ones who choose to stay." It's a badass speech. And every single one of them stopped mutinying him after that. It's really well done. He really knew how to speak to people, man. One of the greatest leaders in history. Probably the greatest leader, if you're talking militarily in history. An interesting man, nonetheless. Let's see. Who do we want to read about next, guys? Who shall we read about next? Shall we read some... Romans or some medievals? Middle Ages people? Do you want to hear about modern day? Do we want to hear about Americans? We can read some Americans if you want. It's up to you all. You mean medieval? Okay, I got you, medieval. Let's go with William of Normandy. When the first, William of Normandy. How William of Normandy conquered a kingdom. When the first son was born to Robert, Duke of Normandy, and Arlette, the daughter of a tanner, the nurse laid the day-old baby on the straw carpet of the castle. In those days, most of the floors of the houses were either whether huts or castles, or of earth or stone, covered with straw, which could be cleared out, as from a modern stable, to allow fresh straw to be laid. When placed on the floor in his little blanket, baby William reached out and clutched some of the straw so tightly in his small pink fist that one of those who noticed smiled and said, "He will take fast hold on everything he lays his hand on when he grows up." When William was 7, Duke Robert, his father, being about to make the voyage to the Holy Land, called some of his nobles together and said, "I am resolved to journey to the place where our Lord Christ died and was buried. But because I know this journey is full of dangers, I would have settled who should be duke if I should die." The nobles and knights took an oath that they would stand by his son William, and not let anyone keep him from being Duke of Normandy. Then Duke Robert sailed away, and died during the long voyage. William was away hunting in a Norman forest when his faithful fool, as they called a sort of clown kept by a king to amuse the court, broke in where he lay asleep and shouted, "Fly, or you will never leave here a living man." The young duke jumped up, dressed in haste, and mounted his horse, riding through the forest in the moonlight, and fording rivers, till he came to the castle of a friend, who was sure to be faithful to him. This knight and his 3 sons rode with William to his own castle. It turned out that a number of the Norman lords who had taken the oath to satisfy Duke Robert were now declaring that they would not serve under the low-born grandson of a tanner. The fool had learned that they were plotting rebellion and the death of his young master. William was now 20 years old, gathered an army of loyal knights and men, and waged fierce warfare against the traitors who retreated within the walls of a Norman town. The young duke soon captured the town and proved to these rebels, as well as to the men of the neighboring kingdoms of France, that the grandson of a tanner might be a greater general than the son of a knight and a king. At the beginning of a great battle of brave knights against braver knights, a champion of heroic size came out from the ranks of the enemy and threw down his gauntlet, or glove, challenging any knight of Normandy to come and fight him with his sword. William himself took up the gauntlet and drove his sword through an open place in the big knight's armor, so that he fell from his horse dead. Then, like the Philistines of old, when David slew their giant, the duke's enemies fled in all directions. Many of them were slain in battle. Others, while running away, were cut down by the battle axes of the Norman knights, and many more perished in the flooded river. Those were brutal days, when people thought that whatever a king or noble might do was all right, if he only had the power to put it through. An example of such high-handed dealing is William's conquest of England. He had once paid a visit to Edward the Confessor, the priestly king of England. The duke claimed on his return to Normandy that Edward had promised to leave him the kingdom as a relative. It happened that Harold, an English earl, was shipwrecked on the coast of Normandy. While William seized Harold, shut him up in a prison, and kept him there until he promised to do his best to make William King of England at the death of Edward. 2 years later, when Edward the Confessor died, it was found that in despite of his promise to William, he had advised in his will that Harold be elected king by the an assembly of English freemen. This body of men took the good old king's advice, chose Harold king, and saw that he was crowned at once. Harold excused himself for breaking his word to William because King Edward had decided in his favor instead of William's, because the oath he had made had been forced from him while he was a prisoner. William, however, was very angry when he heard that Harold had allowed himself to be the crowned king of England. Getting together as large an army as he could in Normandy, he sailed across the channel. In leaping ashore from his boat, he tripped and fell forward with his hands upon the ground. Realizing that his soldiers would think, "Is this a bad sign?" he clutched both his hands full of earth, and rising up he held them, exclaiming, "See, I have taken possession of this land of England." The Normans took position in the village of Hastings. Harold went into camp on the top of Senlac Hill, now called Battle, about 6 miles from Hastings, and dug trenches around. Here a great battle began at 4 o'clock in the morning of the 14th of October, 1066 A.D. In advance of the Norman lines rode a knight in armor, bearing the Duke's colors, singing the song of Roland, the great paladin in the army of Charlemagne, who had lived and fought nearly 300 years before. It was a brave combat, with many knights and nobles on each side. The Norman found the Englishman a foeman worthy of his steel. The Saxons, entrenched on Battle Hill, held their ground so well that William saw he could not gain the day unless he drew them away from the point of vantage. So he ordered a retreat, and the honest Saxons chased the flying Normans, expecting it to catch them and slay them. But to their great surprise, the Normans turned and fought harder than before. Harold was shot and killed by an arrow into his eye. The Saxon army, without a commander, was thrown into confusion, and thus the day was won by strategy. William, Duke of Normandy, became William the Conqueror of England. He was also known as William the Bastard because he was a bastard child. That's a child born out of wedlock. I have been reading something about the choir of angels. I love angelology, makes sense. But that's more of on a Catholic theology topic. That is true. No one now had a better claim to the throne of England than William. So in the new Westminster Abbey on Christmas Day, 1066 A.D., he was crowned and took his proud place in history as William I of England. He had to fight 4 years longer to break down all opposition from the northern counties. In rewarding the Norman knights and nobles who had helped him gain possessions of England, the king gave them great estates scattered over the kingdom. William brought to the island many scholars and bishops, and did much to establish the Church of England. Though he had been rough and cruel, he was both shrewd and wise in his proving his own rights and in strengthening his kingdom. William ruled England with a strong hand for 21 years. He forbade the buying and selling of slaves, yet he reduced the Saxon farmers to serfs, almost as low as slaves. He ordered a record like a census made, and a survey of the kingdom which was recorded in what is called the Domesday Book. It was terribly hard for the good, honest Anglo-Saxon people to see the Normans move into their homes and force them to work like slaves on the very places that they themselves had owned. But the Normans had the power, and the Saxons could not help themselves. For hundreds of years, the Normans spoke the French language, and the Saxons the English. The very name of their meats on your table at home are signs of the Norman conquest nearly 900 years ago. The animals in the pastures and stables of England were called by the names that the Saxons gave them, as cow, calf, sheep, swine, but the meats of those animals, when cooked and served upon the tables of the masters, are still known by the Norman French names as beef, the Norman name for cow, veal, the Norman name for calf, mutton, the Norman name for sheep, pork, the Norman name for hog or swine. Milk is a Saxon word, but cream is from the French, because the Saxons had to milk the cows and drink only milk, while they served the Normans lords the cream. The Norman traits of keenness, tact, and worldly wisdom have been mingling for many centuries with the honest, sturdy integrity of the Anglo-Saxons. That's such a funny line. Oh my goodness. That is so funny. Little by little, as the races grew together, the nobles became less haughty and cruel, and the poorer people were lifted out of their poverty. But it took many centuries for the men to learn that lesson. That is insane. That is a crazy last sentence. Wow. Yeah, this is definitely dated. Holy moly. And he's essentially, it's like, yes, the brave Saxons were tricked by the evil Frenchmen of yes, the honest Saxons were tricked by the evil lying Normans to give up their positions, and the Normans were the lords, and so therefore they treated the Saxons like dogs. So it's such an interesting, this is such an interesting view in like such an interesting time in history where everything was like seen as like either just like treachery or like saying like Anglo Saxons and Normans are like different races of people. It's such an interesting thing to say. That is like old school. Like I don't even know if racism would be the right term. It's such a weird like eugenics, I guess, would be like the closest thing to. It's like studying of races of people based off of like their. It's like the difference between like I guess like North and South Germans, like Germanic people. Like this is like going down to like the time of the god. This is so interesting. Gosh, this is so weird to read, man. Very interesting. Very interesting indeed. Anyways, sorry, my eyes are getting itchy. This is so interesting. Such an interesting read. But there you have it. William the Conqueror. William the Bastard, who became William of Normandy, who became William the Conqueror, who became William the First of England. I think next we'll read something. Hang on one second, let me see what I can find here. Let's see what other books we can read. I have a few other examples. Love having a sister that majors in anthropology. I can ask her the most random questions about humans and she knows. I love it. That's awesome. Oh, I know what we can read. Oh, you know what we can do, guys? Hang on a second. Let me... Give me one second. I need to check something real quick. Hang on. I can't find it. As I get out of my siblings, is one of he's a cook and the other one works in sales for a snack company. I remember that one reading I was reading the other day, and it's driving me insane. Let me find it before I cry. Okay. Let's see. Let me see if I can find. Family's a bunch of nerds. That's funny. Okay. Ooh, here we go. Alright, we're gonna read another thing now. We're gonna read a very old book from 1909. This is called Hovey's Handbook of the Mammoth Cave of Kentucky. Practical guide to the regulation routes with maps and illustrations. And I will share it with you all so that we all can read along together. Isn't that nice, chat? Oh. Lirovich. Picture book, yes, picture book. Very good. I'm sorry. This is a map of the cave, of Mammoth Cave National Park right here. Drawn by Horace G. Hovey in 1909 from 4 surveys with recent additions. Copyright looks like 1907, I believe. Look at that. That's a very old picture right there. Where are the numbers? The numbers. What are the numbers, Mason? Preface. A personal word. I imbibed an early taste for the sciences from my father, the late Professor Edmund Otis Hovey Deedy, one of the founders of Wabash College, a pioneer geologist in Indiana. My annual vacations during a busy professional career spanning over 50 years have largely been given to underground explorations. When 15 years old, I began cave hunting amid the charming grottos of near Madison, Indiana. An enthusiastic comrade, 6 years my senior, then proposed that we visit the Mammoth Cave. For certain reasons, while he went on, I got no further at that time than Louisville, where, however, I bought the bookstore of Morton and Griswold a copy of Rambles in the Mammoth Cave by our visitor. It was just out. It fired my boyish imagination and gave shape to much of my afterlife. More than 400 books, pamphlets, scientific reports, and magazine articles have been published by different writers, besides innumerable newspaper contributions about Kentucky's Great Cavern. Copies of most of these are in the author's library. Yet, there is a demand, there seems to be room, for such practical, condensed, and up-to-date handbook as is now offered. It does not claim to tell all that might be told, and it omits much material that might interest the historian or the scientist. Well, there we go. Never mind. We're not going to read this one. Hang on. We gotta hold up. It omits all the history. Boo. Thumbs down. Thumbs down. Hang on, let me see if I can find something else for us. Color by number. It is not a color by number book, thank you. Let's see. Okay, here we go. I think this is a better book. Okay, here we go. History of Exploration at Mammoth Cave by Stanley D. Sides. That one didn't rhyme or have a talking cat in the hat. I'm gonna put you all in the corner for a minute. You know what? Here. Listen very carefully. Are you ready? You know what time it is, chat? Very yummy. I've been trying to find out more about the first languages ever spoken by organisms on Earth. It's very interesting. You made me go get chips. Go get chips. Seaweed time. Very good. You got it. Many forces had led humans to enter caves in the Mammoth Cave area over the past 5,000 years. Caves have served as a source of adventure, social gathering, scientific discovery, and exploration. They have been valued for economic benefits, including the mining of cave minerals, from calcium nitrate, from which to make saltpeter for gunpowder, and speleothems, as well as their. Get this out of here. Get that out of here. There we go. Sorry. As well as their commercial potential as show caves. Caves were used as places of shelter from the elements of nature, for storing, producing meat, and as a refuge from criminal activity or war. Curiosity drove many prehistoric and historic explorers to enter caves seeking answers to many questions concerning their length, depth, and extent. The curiosity of modern explorers led to the connection of the Flint Ridge Cave System, or FRCS, to Mammoth Cave in 1972. Since then, discoveries have continued, and nobody alive today will hear the end of the Mammoth Cave System. Wow. Many forces have led humans to enter the caves in the Mammoth Cave area for the past 5,000 years. Caves have served as a source of adventure, social gathering, scientific discovery, and exploration. They've been valued as a place where one could mine cave minerals and speleothems for potential economic return from a show cave and for storing produce and meat. Caves were used as a place of shelter from the elements. Did we not just read this up here? Did you just like... Yeah, okay. Anyways. Archaeologist Patty Jo Watson and researchers associated with the Cave Research Foundation, or CRF, archaeological project discovered the late archaic Indians explored Mammoth Cave, traveling far into its passages between 4,000 and 5,000 years ago. This early exploration was not associated with mining activities, and the motivation of these ancient cavers is not evident. What led these prehistoric people to risk venturing far underground is unknown. Whether it was simply for exploration or for cultural ritual cannot be determined today, but the Indians eventually assessed the caves as sources of minerals they wished to mine. Radiocarbon dating indicates that they were going far from the entrance of Mammoth Cave around 5,000 years ago in Salt's Cave, 3,100 years ago, Karstens and Watson's 1996. Sometime after initial exploration, extensive mining of calcium sulfate, magnesium sulfate, and sodium sulfate began, extended far into side passages. Moving forward in time into the historic period, systematic looting of textiles, slippers, gourds, and other aboriginal artifacts for sale to the public had occurred over the past 150 years. Early history. Long hunters from Virginia explored the Green River Valley near Mammoth Cave in the 1780s. Settlers followed rapidly after the Revolutionary War and freedom from Great Britain. Sources of potassium nitrate, or saltpeter, for production of gunpowder were necessary for survival, and the caves were explored for the mineral. Caves containing large amounts of saltpeter had been reported in the Green River Valley by Gilbert Imlay in 1792, who wrote as follows: "Sulfur is found in several places in abundance, and nitre is made from earth, which is collected from caves and other places to which wet has not penetrated. The making the salt in this country is so common that many of the settlers manufacture their own gunpowder. This earth is discovered in great plenty on the waters of Green River than it is in any other part of Kentucky." Imlay, 1797. It's no coincidence that Valentine Simons, the first landowner of Mammoth Cave, chose land containing 2 saltpeter caves. Initial exploration of the caves and assessment of the cave's potential value as saltpeter mines must have been made before he claimed the land. Simons was born in Maryland or Pennsylvania around 1776. Feltius Valentine Simons is likely his full name, as tax records use both names. September 14, 1798, this 22-year-old Simons received a land grant for $80, paying $10 down for 200 acres, or 81 hectares, in Warren County that included 2 saltpeter caves, later named Dixon Cave and Mammoth Cave. Simons' claim was entered in the Warren County Survey Book a year later, about the time he sold the property to John Flatt, probably a relative by marriage through Flatt's wife, Patience Logston. Simons most likely claimed that the land on Flatt's behalf of Flatt to make saltpeter. The land boundaries selected included only the caves and hillsides with little suitable agricultural land. He soon moved to favorable agricultural land northwest of Brownsville, away from supposedly unhealthy environments of a river valley. Interesting. Simons married Annie Durbin on February 8, 1803, and became a prominent landowner in Edmonson County. Valentine and Annie Simons had 10 children and became progenitors of the long line of Simons family of Sunfish, Kentucky. On March 14, 1811, Frederick Ridgely, a brother-in-law of eventual Mammoth Cave owners Charles Wilkins, sent the IDROT map of Mammoth Cave copy to Benjamin Rush in Philadelphia. The map was made prior to 1811. Speculated that Mammoth Cave co-owner Fleming Gatewood was the originator of the map. This map confirmed that all the main upper-level passages of Mammoth Cave had been explored before that time. The Bogart map from 1813 was believed to be a map drawn by Archibald Miller, manager of the saltpeter operation, was working map for the saltpeter operation. The map showed lower-level passages, especially Gantry Avenue, and indicated the presence of an aboriginal basket far out from the passage from Wooden Bowl Room. This map confirmed cave owners or miners explored long distances in search of niter for successful operation of the cave as a saltpeter mine. 4.3. The Tourism Era. Excuse me, guys. In the winter of 1834-35, a Cincinnati civil engineer, Edmund F. Lee, made the first instrument survey and map with a 30-page booklet on Mammoth Cave. He established that known cave passages consisted of about 8 miles, and the longest path to the end of Symes Pit Branch was little more than 2 miles. Robinson Shackelford and Archibald Miller Jr. leased the cave from 1836 to 37 for its tourist potential. Exploring from near the Methodist Church cave room, the main cave entry to the corkscrew was discovered in 1837. However, no way down to Bandits Hall was found until William Darvin went through in 1871. Archibald Miller Jr. stayed as a manager for the new cave owners Franklin Gorin and A.A. Harvey. Gorin brought with him a slave, Stephen Bishop, who was about 17 years old. Gorin leased teen slaves, Matt and Nick Bransford, not brothers, from Thomas Bransford, and the 3 young black men arrived at Mammoth Cave, where Archibald Miller Jr. and Joe Shackelford taught them the routes in the cave. Soon after, Bishop and tourist Hiram C. Stevenson got to the other side of Bottomless Pit in October of 1838, discovering Pensacola Avenue. This was the first major discovery of a new passage since the days of saltpeter mining. A year later, on October 8, 1839, John Croghan, M.D., purchased the cave from Gorin. Bishop's continued exploration soon led to River Styx and Echo River. The latter was crossed in 1840, leading to many more miles of caves. Croghan's vision to develop a popular show cave attraction was advanced by Bishop's exploration and discoveries. Bishop and Mapp and Nick Bransford discoveries contributed to the cave's fame and extended the known cave far beyond Echo River. However, exploration virtually ceased outside established tourist trails after Croghan's death in 1849. Passage surveys were suppressed to restrict knowledge of where the caves undoubtedly extended beyond Mammoth Cave Estate's boundaries. In 1856, David Dale Owen projected that there were at least 150 miles of caves in the area, and Mammoth Cave management promoted the speculation for a century. Some notable exploration did occur in Mammoth Cave after Croghan's death. Cortland Prentice descended the fearsome Maelstrom Pit at the end of Croghan Hall in August 1858. His highly publicized account stated the rope used to lower him caught on fire from friction over a log. Another visitor, F.J. Stevenson from London, visited the cave during the height of the Civil War and wrote that he found his guides idle because of few visitors. Stevenson and Nick Bransford descended Gorin's Dome and supposedly explored Stevenson's Lost River in a boat. Stevenson claimed he and Nick also explored Roaring River. Stevenson's grandiose account also stated that he, Nick, and guide Frank D. Monburn also descended the Maelstrom. Exploration beyond Pynchon's Pass prior to 1860 resulted in the discovery of a passage draining the eastern side of Mammoth Cave Ridge, but the explorers have not been identified. Its location off Martell Avenue and Emily's Puzzle was apparently not shared among contemporary guides. Charles W. Wright's 1860 Guidebook to Mammoth Cave, First Mission Mystic River. In 1870, Wright's A Guide Manual to the Mammoth Cave of Kentucky mentions Mystic River, as well as W. Stump Forwood's an historical and descriptive narrative of the Mammoth Caves of Kentucky. In spite of these accounts, knowledge of the location of Mystic River was lost. Subsequent books by Reverend Horace C. Hovey, Richard E. Call, and others did not mention the stream. Mystic River was rediscovered in 1973 when CRF cavers Gary Eller, Walter Lipton, and C. Peterson found their way into this extensive stream complex. During September of 1879, guides noticed smoke coming from a passage of Serpent Hall and Silliman Avenue. Since fire is not normal in caves, they knew the smoke had to be coming from tour routes. Hovey wrote, going back to Serpent Hall, they wormed their way through a series of extremely narrow crevices, finally emerging by Black Snake Avenue into Wooden Bowl Room. This discovery and subsequent development of the passages named Welcome Avenue, allowed a safe escape route from beyond Echo River to the entrance if parties were trapped by rising riverlets. There you have it. There's a little passage for you guys about Mammoth Cave. We did just do a video on it, so I thought it would be interesting to read a little bit, at least. So, there we go. We have an ad break in about 45 seconds, guys. So I'm going to pause here for a second and let you guys get through the ad. And we'll be back in just a moment, I suppose. What would we like to hear about next? Do we want to hear some tales about knights? Do we want to hear some tales about soldiers? Perhaps a king or some other nobility? You guys tell me what you guys want to hear about, and I will read it for you. And we'll be back in about a minute and 30 seconds. Our breaks are going to start in 5 seconds here, guys. And for those of you not on the ad break, you get to hear me crunch. Can we read a bit about first languages? Let me see if I can find the book on it. I'm gonna have another one. About a minute through the ads, or a minute left of ads, rather. Let's see, I found Introduction to the Study of History of Language. Something that really excites you. No, you're okay. It's okay. Okay, I do have something here. I'm not sure if you've already read this or if it's going to be too old. I'm sure it's going to be a little bit too old. Gutenberg has very old things, so I will read. How about this? I'll read a chapter of this and then we'll go on to a tale about soldiers. I love these little chips, they're so good. Yummy, yummy. I love them. They're so good. Okay. Back to what I was reading. Here we go. In the world. Okay, here we go. Welcome back from the ads, everybody. We're going to be reading a chapter from Introduction to the Study of the History of Language by Herbert A. Strong, M.A., LL.D., Professor of Latin in University College, Liverpool, sometime Professor of Classics at Melbourne University. Willem S. Lodgeman, LHC, Utrecht University, Headmaster of Newton School, Rock Ferry, Cheshire, and Benjamin Ide Wheeler, Professor of Greek at Cornell University, USA. 1891, by the way. A very old book. On the Development of Languages, Chapter 1. It is the province of the science of language to explain, as far as possible, the processes of the development of language from its earliest to its latest stages. The observations made on these processes would naturally be registered in different historical grammars of different definitive languages. These grammars would follow the different steps in the development of each single language from its earliest traditional origin to its most recent phase. Wider and more general observations on the processes of this development would naturally be expressed in a comparative grammar, whose task would be to examine and compare the relations between cognate families of speech, the common origin of which is lost. But it would in this case be necessary to insist that the comparisons instituted should only be between languages in the same stage of development, or that the same stage of development in each of the languages selected for comparison should be taken for the purpose. It is the task of descriptive grammar to ascertain and record the grammatical forms and the conditions generally of a given linguistic community at a given time, to register, in fact, all the utterances of any individual belonging to such community which might fall from him without exposing him to the suspicion of being a foreigner. It will naturally register its observations in abstractions, such as paradigms and rules. Now, if we compare the abstractions made at any given period of a language with those made at another time, we find that the results are different, and we say that the languages has changed in certain respects. Nay, we may find the results are different, and we may say that the language has changed in certain aspects. Nay, we may even be able to detect a certain regularity in these changes. As for instance, if we note that in English, every in the third person singular present indicative of a verb is now replaced by s, but we gather by such comparisons no information as to the as to the true nature and origin of these changes. Cause and effect do not and cannot exist between mere abstractions. They only exist between real objects and facts. It is only when we begin to take an account of the physical and bodily organisms of which languages depend, and to seek for relation of cause and effect in connection with these, that we are on safe ground. The true object of the science of language, as distinguished from descriptive and comparative grammar, is the entirety of the utterances of all individuals that speak, and the relationship of all these utterances to each other. The full history of the development of language would demand an exact knowledge of all the groups of sound ever uttered and heard, and of all of the ideas awakened by such sound groups and symbolized by them. The impossibility of attaining to any such knowledge is obvious. It is, however, possible for us to get a general idea of the play of the forces at work in the vast and complex series of processes involved in the development of language. A part only of these operating forces is cognizable by our senses. Speaking and hearing are two of the processes which can be apprehended, and again, the ideas or pictures called up by language, and those which, though unspoken, pass through our conscience, are to some extent capable of cognition. But one of the greatest triumphs of modern psychology is the proof, due to its agency, of the unconscious activity of the human mind. All that has once been present to our consciousness remains as a working factor in unconsciousness. Power consciously acquired by exercise and consciousness may be translated into power operating and manifesting itself unconsciously. The mind forms from the groups of ideas with which it is stored. Psychological groups, such as sound groups, sequences of sounds, sequences of ideas, and syntactical combinations. Strong and weak verbs, derivatives from the same root, words fulfilling identical functions, such as the different parts of speech, associate themselves into groups. And again, the plurals of nouns, their different cases, their different inflections, and even entire clauses of similar construction of similar cadence, groups themselves in the same way. These groups arise naturally, automatically, and unconsciously, and must not be confused with categories consciously drawn up by grammarians, though the two, of course, must frequently coincide. These groups must obviously be in a constant state of change, some growing weaker from the fact that they are strengthened by no fresh impulse, and some being strengthened and, it may be, changed by the accession of new ideas which ally themselves within. It must not be overlooked also that as each person's mind is differently constituted, the groups of his linguistic ideas will take development peculiar to himself, even though the sources whence the groups take their rise should be identical. Yet the elements which go to form the groups will be introduced differently, and with different intensity in the case of each individual. You said this is a book. Could you please tell me the name? Yes, the name is... Hang on one second. It's this right here. Introduction to the Study of the Study of the History of Language by Herbert A. Strong. I just copied it straight from the book, sorry. Where were we at? Let's see here. We were... Constant change. Where were we at? I completely forgot where we were at. Thank you very much, you're welcome. Object of language science. Okay. The action of our physical organs unaided would be unable to bring about the development of language. The word, when once spoken, disappears and leaves no traces. Psychological activity, and this alone, connects the pictures of the past with the present. It must, therefore, be the task of the historian of language to give as complete an account as possible of the physical organisms on which the production of language depends. And the physical organism of language in each individual is the aggregate of more or less conscious recollections of words, nay, even of entire phrases, and of their connection with certain ideas, which is lodged in his mind. It is the business of the historian of language to watch and examine these organisms as closely as possible, to describe the elements of which they are composed and their connection with each other. The state or condition of a language at a particular period can only be described by one possessed of full knowledge of the physical conditions at a particular time of all the members of any linguistic community. The more fully such observations as they referred to above are carried out, and the greater the number of individuals thus examined, the more nearly shall we be in a condition to give an accurate description of the state of language. Without a rigidly scrupulous examination such as we have described, it would be impossible to say how much in the language of any individual is common to all or most individuals speaking the same language, and how much is to be set down to individual peculiarity. In every case, it will be found that the standard of the language governs to some extent the language of every individual. But in this case of each individual, there are likewise elements which do not conform to the standard or normal language, and which are, in fact, individual peculiarities. Hello, Swift. Welcome in. How are you doing? In any case, the observation of a physical organism of language is difficult. It cannot, like the physical side of language, i.e. the sounds actually produced and even the mode of the production, be directly observed, for it lies unseen in the mind and is only known by its effects. Of the physical phenomena of language activity, the acoustic are those which lend themselves most readily to our observation. We can make the same individual repeat sounds practically identical as often as we please. We can note these with more or less accuracy in proportion as our own sense of hearing is exact and developed. But as the transitions between the different sounds are so infinitely small, it follows that it must be a matter of extreme difficulty for the listener to decide whether the sounds are indeed precisely the same in color, pitch, etc. While again, if it be desired to reproduce any sound, the process has to be carried out by orderly repeating it, striving to reproduce it by an appeal to another sense of hearing. We register the sounds of a language by mastering and registering the movements of the organs of speech that produce them. Alphabetical symbols are at best but very imperfect pictures of sound groups. They're used inconsistently in most cases, and in any case, even the most perfect phonetic alphabet cannot give a true and exact picture of the countless sounds in speech. Sounds which require to be constantly denoted anew in every language. We can only succeed at all in registering such sounds when we are able to closely observe the sounds uttered by living individuals. But we cannot do this. We must always think of the sounds which the writing is intended to represent. The power to do demands some acquaintance with phonetics, and within the relation between writing and language. Thus, a certain special training is necessary before we can hope to be able to gain any real knowledge of even the physical manifestations of linguistic activity. Oh my gosh. The physical factors in linguistic activity lie, like everything else, physical, unseen in the mind, and can therefore only be scrutinized by means of examination made upon our own minds. In the process of watching other individuals, we can never perceive any other than the physical results. And thus, it happens that in order to acquaint ourselves with the physical organisms of language and others, we have to watch as closely as possible the processes in our own mind, and then to classify the phenomenon which we observe in the case of others by the analogy of what we observe in our own. As we both think and speak in the mother tongue, our classifications by analogy will be easier when we have to deal with fellow countrymen. So too, for obvious reasons, with a living subject rather than with what has been committed in writing to writing in the past. It will then be plain that the observation of any given state of language is no easy matter, owing to the manifold and complex way in which groups of ideas associate themselves in the human mind, and owing to the incessant progress of hardly perceptible sound change. It may easily be gathered that even the most full and perfect of ordinary grammars are quite unable to portray the manner in which different ideas and groups of ideas range and reclassify themselves. Our grammatical system can give but the most imperfect picture of the relationships existing between our certain and different ideas. Our grammatical system can give but the most imperfect picture of the relationship existing between different ideas. Certain categories, for instance, are drawn up and under one or other of these range are range words under the name of certain parts of speech. As a matter of fact, a large proportion of words is capable of being used to fulfill the function of several parts of speech, and in no language is this more obvious than in English. Again, we are accustoming grammar to meet, even in the case of the Indo-European groups of languages, with the same grammatical term employed to express quite different functions, as when we speak of the Latin future and call the English future in I shall or I will do by the same name. Again, we are accustomed, in the case of a language which has passed from the synthetic to the analytic stage, to employ the same categories regardless of the fact that, in the analytical form of the language, new shades of meaning have found expression as they have also come into being. Again, we often define the meaning of words by their etymology, even though the ordinary speaker may have no knowledge whatever of that etymology. And a new and very different meaning may have been attached to the word itself. Interesting. Very interesting. That was interesting stuff. There you go. There's our chapter. That was quite interesting. Oh my gosh. Whoops. Like the word baddie. Correct. That is a very lowbrow example of that. Very good. You're welcome. You're welcome, Clyde. Well, Swift, I hope you're having a good night. Hope you've enjoyed our reading there. Alright, shall we continue? What shall we read for you next? How about a story from Iwo Jima? Actually, let me grab a water real quick. Sorry, hang on 1 second. I'm out of seaweed crackers now, and I'm very sad. I'm saddened by my lack of seaweed crackers. Oh well. Maybe one day we'll have some more. Now we starve. Okay, ladies and gentlemen. Our next reading is going to be called Closing In, Marines in the Seizure of Iwo Jima. Marines in World War II Commemorative Series by Colonel Joseph H. Alexander, United States Marine Corps, retired. Let me pull this up for you all real quick, sorry. There are pictures attached to this one. There we are. Marines of Company E, 2nd Battalion, 28th Marines lowered the first flag raised over Mount Suribachi, while other men raised a second flag, which became the subject of Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal's world-famous photograph. A Marine flamethrower operator moves forward to assault the Japanese pillbox on Motoyama Airfield. Okay, here we go. Closing in, Marines in the seizure of Iwo Jima. Sunday, March 4th, 1945, marked the end of the second week of the U.S. invasion of Iwo Jima. By this point, the assault elements of 3rd, 4th, and 5th Marine Divisions were exhausted. Combat efficiency reduced to dangerously low levels. The thrilling sight of the American flag being raised by the 28th Marines on Mount Suribachi had occurred 10 days earlier, a lifetime on Sulphur Island. The landing forces of the 5th Amphibious Corps, or VAC, had already sustained 13,000 casualties, including 3,000 dead. The front lines were a jagged serration across Iwo's fat northern half, still in the middle of the main Japanese defense. Ahead, the going seemed all uphill against a well-disciplined, rarely visible enemy. In the center of the island, the 3rd Marine Division units had been up most of the night, repelling a small but determined Japanese counterattack, which had found the scene between the 21st and the 9th Marines. Vicious close-quarters combat had caused both sides heavy casualties. The counterattack spoiled the division's preparations for a morning advance. Both regiments made marginal gains against very stiff opposition. To the east, the 4th Marine Division had finally captured Hill 382, ending its long exposure in the amphitheater. But combat efficiency had fallen to 50%. It would drop another 5 points by nightfall. On this day, the 24th Marines, supported by flame tanks, advanced a total of 100 yards, pausing to detonate more than a ton of explosives against enemy cave positions in that sector. 23rd and 25th Marines entered the most difficult terrain yet encountered, broken ground that limited visibility to only a few feet. Along the western flank, the 5th Marine Division had just sieged Nishi Ridge and Hill 362B the previous day, suffering more than 500 casualties. It too had been up most of the night, engaging a sizable force of infiltrators. The Sunday morning attacks lacked coordination, reflecting the division's collective exhaustion. Most rival companies were at half strength. The net gain for the day, the division reported, was practically nil. But the day was beginning to take its toll on the Japanese garrison as well. General Tadamichi Kurabayashi knew his 109th Division had inflicted heavy casualties on the attacking Marines, yet his own losses had been comparable. The Americans' capture of the key hills in the main defense sector the day before deprived him of his invaluable artillery observation sites. His brilliant chief of artillery, Colonel Chosaku Kaido, lay dying. On this day, Kurabayashi's moved his own command post from the Central Highlands to a large cave on the northwest coast. The usual blandishments from Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo reached him by radio that afternoon. Kurabayashi was in no mood for heroic rhetoric. "Send me air and naval support, and I will hold the island," he signaled. "Without them, I cannot hold." There's a picture called Silence in the Gorge, an acrylic painting on masonite by Colonel Charles H. Waterhouse, U.S. Marine Corps retired, who as a private first class was wounded during the battle. That afternoon, the fighting men on both sides witnessed the harbinger of Iwo Jima's fate. Through the overcast skies appeared a gigantic silver bomber, the largest aircraft anyone had ever seen. It was the Boeing B-29 Superforce, dynamite. Crippled in a raid over Tokyo, seeking an emergency landing on the island's scruffy main airstrip. As Americans in the vicinity held their breaths, the big bomber swooped in from the south, landed heavily, clipped a field telephone pole with a wing, and shuddered to a stop less than 50 feet from the bitter end of the strip. Pilot Lieutenant Fred Mallow and his 10-man crew were extremely glad to be alive, but they didn't stay long. Every Japanese gunner within range wanted to bag that prize. Mechanics made field repairs within a half hour. Then the 65-ton Superfort lumbered aloft through a heavy hail of enemy gunfire and headed back to its base in Tinian. The Marines cheered. The Battle of Iwo Jima would rage on for another 22 days, claiming 11,000 more American casualties and the lives of virtually the entire Japanese garrison. This was a colossal fight between two well-armed veteran forces, the biggest and bloodiest battle in the history of the United States Marine Corps. From the 4th of March on, however, the leaders of both sides entertained no doubts as to the ultimate outcome. Assault preparations. Iwo Jima was one of those rare amphibious landings where the assault troops could clearly see the value of the objective. They were the first ground units to approach within 1,000 miles of the Japanese homeland, and they were participating directly in support of the strategic bombing campaign. The latter element represented a new wrinkle on an old theme. For 40 years, the U.S. Marines had been developing the capability for seizing advanced naval bases in support of the fleet, increasingly in the Pacific War, and most especially at Saipan, Tinian, and now Iwo Jima. They were seizing advanced air bases to further strategic bombing of the Japanese home islands. American servicemen had awaited the coming of the B-29s for years. The very long-range bombers, which had become operational too late for the European War, had been striking mainland Japan since November of 1944. Results proved disappointing. The problem stemmed not from the pilots of planes, but rather from a vexing little spit of volcanic rock laying halfway along the direct path from Saipan to Tokyo, Iwo Jima. Iwo's radar gave the Japanese defense authorities 2 hours advance notice of every B-29 strike. Japanese fighters based on Iwo swarmed up to harass the unescorted superforts going in and especially coming home, picking off those bombers crippled by anti-aircraft fire. As a result, the B-29s had to fly higher along circuitous routes and with a reduced payload. At the same time, enemy bombers based on Iwo often raided B-29 bases in the Marianas, causing some damage. The Joint Chiefs of Staff decided Iwo Jima must be captured and a U.S. air base built there. This would eliminate Japanese bombing raids and the early warning interceptions, provide fighter escorts throughout the most dangerous portion of the long B-29 missions, and enable greater payloads at longer ranges. Iwo Jima in American hands would also provide a welcome emergency field for crippled B-29s returning from Tokyo, and it would also protect the flank of the pending invasion of Okinawa. In October of 1944, the Joint Chiefs directed Fleet Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, CENTSEAPAC, to seize and develop Iwo Jima within the ensuing 3 months. This launched Operation Detachment. The first enemy in the campaign would prove to be the island itself, an ugly, barren, foul-smelling chunk of volcanic sand and rock, barely 10 square miles in size. Iwo Jima means Sulphur Island in Japanese, as described by one Imperial Army staff officer. The place was an island of sulfur, no water, no sparrow, no swallow. Less poetic American officers saw Iwo's resemblance to a pork chop, with the 556 doormat volcano Mount Suribachi dominating the narrow southern end, overlooking the only potential landing beaches. To the north, the land rose unevenly onto the Motoyama Plateau, falling off sharply along the coasts into steep cliffs and canyons. The terrain in the north represented the defender's dream, broken, convoluted, cave-dotted, a jungle of stone, breathed by volcanic steam, and twisted landscape appeared ungodly, almost moon-like. More than one surviving Marine compared the island to something out of Dante's Inferno. Forbidding Iwo Jima had two redeeming features in 1945. The military value of its airfields and the psychological status of the island as a historical possession of Japan. Iwo Jima lay in Japan's inner vital defense zone and was, in fact, administered as part of the Tokyo Prefecture. In the words of one Japanese officer, Iwo Jima is the doorkeeper to the imperial capital. Even by the slowest aircraft, Tokyo could be reached in 3 flight hours from Iwo. In the battle for Iwo Jima, a total of 28,000 Americans and Japanese would give their lives in the savage fighting during the last winter months of 1945. No one on the American side ever suggested that taking Iwo Jima would be an easy proposition. Admiral Nimitz assigned the mission to the same team which had prevailed so effectively in the earlier amphibious assaults on the Gilberts, Marshalls, and Marianas Islands. Admiral Raymond A. Spruance, commanding the 5th Fleet, Vice Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, commanding the Expeditionary Forces, and Rear Admiral Harry W. Hill, commanding the attack force. Spruance added the highly regarded Rear Admiral William H.P. Blandy, veteran of the Peleliu and Anglar landings, to command the amphibious support forces, responsible for minesweeping, underwater demolition teams, and preliminary naval air and gun bombardment. We have ads in about 10 seconds. I'm going to stop reading for a moment, guys. I'm going to get some water, too. Oh, sorry. Alright, how are we feeling about the story so far, y'all? I hope we're enjoying it. Let me know if I'm being too loud or if I need to read louder or anything like that. Oh, thanks for the follow, Lirovich. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. I like audiobooks. Thanks. Got about another minute or so, guys, before our ad's up, so just making sure that I rest my voice a little bit. Sorry. I am still kind of under the weather, I'm not gonna lie. And this ad is a bit precarious. Okay, let's see here. Are we back from ads yet? Almost back from ads, y'all. Almost back from ads, everybody. Hang on one second. And 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Welcome back, everybody, from the ads. I hope you had a good time watching whatever ad you got given. Welcome back. Welcome back. Okay, so, as we were saying, as usual, maintaining unremitting military pressure on the enemy meant an accelerated planning schedule and an overriding emphasis on speed of execution. The amphibious task force preparing to assault Iwo Jima soon found itself squeezed on both ends. Hill and Blandy had a critical need for the amphibious ships, landing craft, and shore bombardment vessels currently being used by General Douglas MacArthur in his reconquest of Luzon in the Philippines. But bad weather and stiff enemy resistance combined to delay completion of that operation. Joint Chiefs reluctantly postponed D-Day for Iwo Jima from January 20th, 1945 until February 19th. Tail end of the schedule provided no relief. D-Day for Okinawa could go no later than April 1st because of the approach of the monsoon season. The constricted time frame for Iwo would have grave implications for the landing force. The experienced 5th Amphibious Corps under Major General Harry Schmidt, U.S. Marine Corps, would provide the landing force an unprecedented assembly of 3 Marine divisions, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Schmidt would have the distinction of commanding the largest force of U.S. Marines ever committed in a single battle. The combined force, which eventually totaled more than 80,000 men, well above half of the Marines were veterans of earlier fighting in the Pacific, Realistic training had been prepared for the newcomers as well. The troops assaulting Iwo Jima were arguably the most proficient amphibious force the world had ever seen. Unfortunately, two senior Marines shared the limelight for the Iwo Jima battle, and history has often done both an injustice. Spruance and Turner prevailed upon Lieutenant General Holland M. Smith, then commanding Fleet Marine Forces Pacific, to participate in Operation Detachment as Commanding General Expeditionary Troops. This was a gracious billet. Schmidt had the rank, experience, staff, and the resources to execute Corps-level responsibility without being second-guessed by another headquarters. Smith, the amphibious pioneer and veteran of landings in the Aleutians, Gilberts, Marshalls, and Marianas, admitted to being embarrassed by the incitement. My son had almost set by then, he stated. I think they had asked me along only in case something happened to Harry Schmidt. Smith tried to keep out of Schmidt's way, but his subsequent decision to withhold commitment of the 3rd Marines, the Expeditionary Troop Reserves, remains as controversial today as it did in 1945. Well, thank you for the 3-stream watch streak, McGleasy. Thank you. I hope you're enjoying it. Burdened with heavy packs and equipment, Marine communicators dashed for cover while advancing under heavy fodder during the drive inland from the beaches. I wonder if they're going to talk about the code breakers in here. Or the code talkers, rather. Interesting. I think we'll read... I think we'll read till D-Day, maybe. Hope you're doing good, my guy. I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. I might lead a little bit less. Yeah, what's the heck? Not like I got anything else to do tonight, you know? Holland Smith was an undeniable asset to Iwo Jima campaign. During the top-level planning stage, he was often, as always, a voice in the wilderness, predicting severe casualties unless greater and more effective preliminary naval marvel was provided. He diverted the press and the visiting dignitaries from Schmidt, always providing realistic counterpoints to some of the rosier staff estimates. It's a tough proposition, Smith said about Iwo. That's why we are here. General Schmidt, whose few public pronouncements left him saddled with the unfortunate prediction of a 10-day conquest of Iwo Jima, came to resent the perceived role Holland Smith played in post-war accounts. As he would forcibly state, I was the commander of all troops on Iwo Jima at all times. Holland Smith never had a command post ashore, never issued a single order ashore, never spent a single night ashore. Isn't it important from a historical standpoint that I commanded the greatest number of Marines ever to be engaged in a single action in the entire history of the Marine Corps? General Smith would not agree with those points. Smith provided a useful role, but Schmidt and his exceptional staff deserve maximum credit for planning and executing the difficult and bloody battle of Iwo Jima. Sorry about that, guys. The 5th Amphibious Corps achievement was made even more memorable by the enormously difficult opposition provided by the island and the enemy. In Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kurabayashi's, the Americans faced one of the most formidable opponents of the war, a 5th-generation samurai, handpicked and personally extolled by the Emperor. Kurabayashi combined combat experience with an innovative mind and an iron will. Although this would be the only combat against American forces, he had learned much about his prospective opponents from earlier service in the United States. More significantly, he could appraise with an unblinking eye the results of previous Japanese attempts to repel American invasions of Japanese-held garrisons. Heroic rhetoric aside, Kurabayashi saw little to commend the defend at the water's edge tactics and all-or-nothing banzai attacks, which had characterized Japanese failures from Tarawa to Tinian. Kurabayashi, a realist, also knew not to expect much help from Japan, for it had a depleted fleet and air forces. His best chance, he concluded, would be to maximize Iwo's forbidding terrain with a defense in depth, along the pattern of the recent Biak and Peleliu defense efforts. He would eschew coast defenses, anti-landing, and banzai tactics, and instead conduct a prolonged battle of attrition, a war of nerves, patience, and time. Possibly the Americans would lose heart and abandon the campaign. Such a seemingly passive policy, even that late in the war, seemed revolutionary to senior Japanese Army and Navy leaders. It ran counter to the deeply engraved warrior code, which viewed the defensive as only an unpleasant interim pending resumption of the glorious offensive in which one could destroy the enemy with sword and bayonet. Even Imperial General Headquarters grew nervous. There's some evidence of the top level request for guidance in defending against American storm landings from Nazi Germany, whose sad experiences in trying to defend Normandy at the water's edge had proven disastrous. The Japanese remained unconvinced. Kobayashi needed every bit of his top connections with the Emperor to keep from being summarily relieved for his radical proposals. It was not a complete organizational. His was not a complete organizational victory. The Navy insisted on building guns, casemates, and blockhouses along the obvious landing beaches on Iwo, but in general, he prevailed. Kobayashi's demanded the assistance of the finest mining engineers and fortification specialists in the empire. Here again, the island favored the defender. Iwo's volcanic sand mixed readily with cement to produce superior concrete for installations. The soft rock lent itself into rapid digging. Half the garrison lay aside their weapons to labor with pick and spade. When American heavy bombers from 7th Air Force commenced a daily pounding of the island in early December of 1944, Kobayashi simply moved everything: weapons, command posts, barracks, aid stations underground. These engineering achievements were remarkable. Massed gun positions provide interlocking fields of fire. Miles of tunnels link key defensive positions. Every cave featured multiple outlets and ventilation tubes. One installation inside of Mount Suribachi ran 7 stories deep. That's really deep. Oh my gosh, that's... Imagine a 7-story tall building underneath a mountain. The Americans would rarely see a live Japanese or on Iwo Jima until the bitter end. American intelligence experts, aided by documents captured in Saipan and by an almost daily flow of aerial photography and periscope-level pictures from submarine spearfish, puzzled over the disappearing act of the Japanese garrison. Trained photo interpreters used stereoscopic lenses, listed nearly 700 potential targets, but all were hardened, covered, and masked. The intelligence staffs knew there was no fresh water available on the island. They could see the rainwater cisterns, and they knew the average monthly rainfall would deliver. They concluded the garrison could not possibly survive under those conditions in numbers greater than 12,000 or 13,000. But Kobayashi's force was twice that size. The men existed on half rations of water for months before that battle began. Unlike earlier amphibious assaults on Guadalcanal and Tarawa, the Americans would not enjoy either strategic or tactical surprise at Iwo Jima. Japanese strategists concluded Iwo Jima would be invaded soon after the loss of the Marianas. 6 months before the battle, Kobayashi wrote to his wife, "The Americans will surely invade this Iwo Jima. Do not look for my return." He worked his men ruthlessly to complete all defensive and training preparations by 11 February 1945, and met the objective. His was a mixed force of veterans and recruits, soldiers and sailors. His artillerymen and mortar crews were among the best in the empire. Regardless, he trained and disciplined them all. As the Americans soon discovered, each fighting position contained the commander's courageous battle vows, prominently posted above the firing apertures. Troops were admonished to maintain their position and exact 10 American lives for every Japanese death. General Schmidt issued 5th Amphibious Corps Operation Plan 544 on 23 December 1944. The plan offered nothing fancy. Mount Suribachi dominated both potential beaches, but at 3,000 yards of black sand along the southeastern coast appeared more sheltered from the prevailing winds. Here, the 5th Amphibious Corps would land on D-Day, the 4th Marine Division on the right, 5th on the left, and 3rd in reserve. The initial objective included the lower airfield, the west coast, and Suribachi. Then the force would swing into a line and attack north, shoulder to shoulder. Anticipation of a major Japanese counterattack the first night influenced the landing plan. "We welcome a counterattack," said Holland Smith. "That's generally when we break their backs." Both Schmidt and 4th Marine Division Commander Major General Clifton B. Cates knew from recent experience at Tinian how capable the Japanese were at assembling large reserves at potential soft spots along the fresh beachhead. The Assault Division would plan to land their artillery regiments before dark on D-Day in their contingency. Physical separation of the 3 divisions from Guam to Hawaii had no adverse effect on preparatory training. Where it counted most, the proficiency of small units in amphibious landings and combined arms assaults on fortified positions. Each division was well prepared for the forthcoming invasion. The 3rd Marine Division had just completed its participation in the successful recapture of Guam. Field training often extended to active combat patrols to root out die-hard Japanese survivors. In Maui, the 4th Marine Division prepared for its 4th major assault landing in 13 months with quiet confidence. Recalled Major Frederick J. Karch, operations officer for the 14th Marines. We had continuity there of veterans that was just unbeatable. In neighboring Hawaii, the 5th Marine Division calmly prepared for its first combat experience. The unit's newness would prove misleading. Well above half the officers and men were veterans, including a number of former Marines parachutists and a few raiders who had first fought in the Solomons. Lieutenant Colonel Don J. Robertson took command of 3rd Battalion, 27th Marines, merely 2 weeks before embarkation, and immediately ordered it into the field for a sustained live-fire exercise. His competence and confidence impressed him. These were professionals, he concluded. Dynamite, the first crippled B-29 to make an emergency landing on Iwo Jima during the fighting, is surrounded by Marines and Seabees on 4th March 1945. Among the veterans preparing for Iwo Jima were 2 Medal of Honor recipients from the Guadalcanal campaign, Gunnery Sergeant John Manila John Basilone and Lieutenant Colonel Robert E. Gaylor. Headquarters Marine Corps preferred to keep such distinguished veterans in the States for morale purposes, but both men wrangled their way back overseas, Basilone leading a machine gun platoon, and Gaylor delivering a new radar unit for employment with the Landing Force Air Support Control Unit. The Guadalcanal veterans would only shake their heads at the abundance of amphibious shipping available for Operation Detachment. Admiral Turner would command 495 ships, of which 140 were amphibiously configured, the whole array 10 times the size of Guadalcanal's task force. Still, there were problems. So many of the ships and crews were new that each rehearsal featured embarrassing collisions and other accidents. The new TD-18 bulldozers were found to be an inch too wide for the medium landing craft. The newly modified M4A3 Sherman tanks provided so heavy that the LCMs rode with dangerously low freeboards. Likewise, 105mm howitzers overloaded the amphibious trucks DUKWs to the point of near unseaworthiness. These factors would prove costly in Iwo's unpredictable surf zone. The problems notwithstanding, the huge force embarked and began the familiar move westward. Said Colonel Robert E. Hogaboom, Chief of Staff, 3rd Marine Division. We were in good shape, well-trained, well-equipped, and thoroughly supported. On Iwo Jima, General Kurobayashi had benefited from the American postponements of Operation Detachment because of the delays in the Philippine campaign. He, too, felt as ready and prepared as possible. When the American Armada sailed from the Marianas on 13th February, he was forewarned. He deployed 1 infantry battalion in the vicinity of the beaches and lower airfield, ordered the bulk of his garrison to its assigned fighting holes, and settled down to await the inevitable storm. An aerial view of Iwo Jima for landing clearly shows pork chop shaped. Mount Suribachi in the right foreground is at the southern end of the island. Pork chop shape. Mount Suribachi right there. This is where they landed. So there's an airfield here, and they had to land here, and then you have to go up this mountain, capture Suribachi, and then march all the way up there. Crazy. 2 contentious issues divided the Navy Marine team as D-Day at Iwo Jima loomed closer. The first involved Admiral Spruance's decision to detach Task Force 58, the fast carriers under Admiral Mark Mitchell, to attack strategic targets on Honshu simultaneously with the onset of Admiral Blandy's preliminary bombardment of Iwo. The Marines suspected Navy Air Force rivalry at work here. Most of Mitchell's targets were aircraft factories, which the B-29s had missed badly a few days earlier. What the Marines really begrudged was Mitchell taking all 8 Marine Corps fighter squadrons assigned to the fast carrier, plus the new fast battleships with their 16-inch guns. Task Force 58 returned to Iwo in time to render sparkling support with these assets on D-Day, but 2 days later, it was off again, this time for good. The other issue was related to its concern. The other issue was related, and it concerned the continuing argument between senior Navy and Marine officers over the extent of preliminary naval gunfire. The Marines looked at the intelligence reports on Iwo and requested 10 days of preliminary fire. The Navy said it had neither the time nor the ammo to spare. 3 days would have to suffice. Colin Smith and Harry Schmidt continued to plead finally offering to compromise to 4 days. Turner deferred to Spruance, who ruled that the 3 days prep fires, in conjunction with the daily pounding being administered by the 7th Air Force, would do the job. Lieutenant Colonel Donald M. Weller, United States Marine Corps, served as the FMF PAC, Task Force 51 Naval Gunfire Officer, and no one in either sea service knew the business more thoroughly. Weller had absorbed the lessons of the Pacific War well, especially those of the conspicuous failures at Tarawa. The issue, he argued forcibly to Admiral Turner, was not the weight of shells, nor their caliber, but rather time. Destruction of heavily fortified enemy targets took deliberate pinpoint firing from close ranges, assessed and adjusted by aerial observers. Iwo Jima's 700 hard targets would require time knockout, a lot of time. The Spruance nor Turner had time to give. For strategic, tactical, and logistics reasons, 3 days of firing by Admiral Blandy's sizable bombardment force would either deliver 4 times the amount of shells Tarawa received and 1.5 times that delivered by larger Saipan. It would have to do. In effect, Iwo's notorious foul weather, the imperviousness of many of the Japanese fortifications, and other distractions dissipated even the 3 days bombardment. We got about 13 hours worth of fire support during the 34 hours of the available daylight, complained Brigadier General William W. Rogers, Chief of Staff to General Smith. The Americans received unexpected bonus when General Kurabayashi committed his only known tactical error during the battle. This occurred on D-2, as a force of 100 Navy and Marine underwater demolition team, Frogmen, bravely approached the eastern beaches, escorted by a dozen LCI landing craft firing their guns and rockets. Kurabayashi's evidently believed this to be the main landing and authorized the coastal batteries to open fire. The exchange was hot and heavy, with the LCIs getting the worst of it, but U.S. battleships and cruisers hurried in to blast the casemate guns suddenly revealed on the slopes of Suribachi and along the rock quarry on the right flank. That night, gravely concerned about the hundreds of Japanese targets still untouched by 2 days of firing, Admiral Blandy conducted a council of war on board his flagship. At Weller's suggestion, Blandy junked the original plan and directed his gunships to concentrate exclusively on the beach area. This was done with considerable effect on D-1 and D-Day morning itself. Kurabayashi noted that most of the positions the Imperial Navy insisted on building along the beach approaches had in fact been destroyed, as he had predicted. Yet his main defensive belt, crisscrossing the Matayama Plateau, remained intact. "I pray for a heroic fight," he told his staff. On board Admiral Turner's flagship, the press briefing held the night before D-Day was uncommonly somber. General Holland Smith predicted heavy casualties, possibly as many as 15,000, would shock all hands. A man clad in khakis without rank insignia then stood up to address the room. It was James V. Forrestal, Secretary of the Navy. Iwo Jima, like Tarawa, leaves very little choice, he said quietly, except to take it by force of arms, by character and courage. How much more is this? Oh my gosh, this is like a whole book, huh? Do we want to keep reading this chat, or do we want to go to something else? We'll read this last part here. And you guys tell me. In the estimation of Lieutenant Colonel Justice M. Chambers, United States Marine Corps, Battalion Commander of the 3rd Marine Division, 3rd Marines' 25th Battalion, whose 4 days ashore resulted in the Purple Heart and the Medal of Honor. On Iwo Jima, one of the smartest generals commanded, a man who did not believe in the bonsai business. Each job was to kill 10 Marines. For a while, they were beating their quotas. Chambers was describing Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kurabayashi, Imperial Japanese Army, Commanding General 109th Division, and Commander Ogasawara Army Route. The U.S. Marines have rarely faced a tougher opponent. Kurabayashi, 53, a native of Nagano Prefecture, had served the Emperor as a cavalry officer since graduating from the military academy in 1914. He spent several years as a junior officer posted to the Japanese embassies in America and Canada. At the advent of war in Asia, Kurabayashi commanded a cavalry regiment in combat in Manchuria and a brigade in northern China. Later, he served as chief of staff of the 23rd Army during the capture of Hong Kong. Favored by the Emperor, he returned from China to command the Imperial Guards Division in Tokyo. After the fall of Saipan in June 1944, he was assigned to command the defensive fortress of Iwo Jima. Kurabayashi was a realist. He saw 2 He saw Iwo Jima's crusade airstrips, or excuse me, Iwo Jima's crewed airships as a net liability to the Empire, at best providing nuisance raids against the B-29s, certain to draw attention of American strategic planners. Iwo Jima's airfields in American hands would pose an enormous threat to Japan. Hirabayashi saw only two options: either blow up the entire island, which proved infeasible, or defend it to the death. To do the latter effectively, he adapted a radical defensive policy, foregoing the water's edge linear tactics and suicidal bonsai charges of previous island battles. This stirred controversy at higher levels. Imperial headquarters even asked the Nazis for advice on repelling American invasions, as well as among Kirabayashi's own officers. Kirabayashi made some compromises with the semi-independent naval forces on the island, but sacked 18 senior army officers, including his own chief of staff. Those who remained would implement their command policies to the letter. Doomed without naval or air support, Kirabayashi nevertheless proved to be a resolute and resourceful field commander. His only tactical error was to authorize the sector commander to engage the U.S. task force covering underwater demolitions team operations on D2, or excuse me, D-2. This became a gift to the attackers, for it revealed to American gunners the previously massed batteries, which otherwise would have slaughtered the assault waves on D-Day. Japanese accounts indicate Kirabayashi committed harakiri, the Japanese ritualistic killing of yourself, in his cave near Kitano Point on March 23rd, 1945, the 33rd date of the battle. Of all our adversaries in the Pacific, said General Holland M. Smith, United States Marine Corps, Kirabayashi was the most redoubtable. Said another Marine, let's hope the Japs don't have any more like him. Interesting. Very interesting read. I like that. That was good. I like that read. That was a very interesting read, I think. What do you guys think? I was parched. Sorry, I had to take a little drink of water. I love World War I and II. Yeah, me too. Oh, I have to stretch. Sorry about that, guys. Ooh. Alright, so we read some old accounts of history from the early 1900s. We've read some history on Mammoth Cave. We've done some World War II history. We did history of languages. We've got a lot of stuff in here tonight. Did we have any more that we want to do? How about some history questions? You guys like to do some history questions? You can ask me any history question, then I'll try to answer. Maybe that'll be fun. I don't know. Or if you guys don't want to do that, we can just do something else. It's fine. I don't care. Either way is fine with me. We're here for a little bit still. Thank you. How about some life advice? Does anybody have any life advice that they need? I can offer advice. I can offer advice and guidance from a man, perhaps your elder or perhaps younger than you. I don't know. A man with a lot of experience in life. How about that? Is that better? All the life advice. Okay. What do you guys need advice on? Anything? Everything? I'm trying to think. Trying to think of good life advice to give to people. I think one piece of advice I could give is, I see this an awful lot with certain people, is don't be too prideful to ask for help. Or be too prideful to accept help from people you deem as like maybe not lesser than, but people you can't accept it from. I see a lot of people who fall into this trap whenever they have issues going on, where they just refuse to accept help from individuals that are of a different mindset of them, I guess is the best word. And that can be any mindset, right? It can be based on ideas that they share for religion or politics or even gender or even race. People are, I hate to say it, guys, people are very discriminatory. However, I'll say this: don't be that person, obviously, but don't be too prideful. Even if you do have that in you, don't be too prideful to ask for help and accept and receive help from people who you deem as not on your level, I guess is the best way to say it. Pride cometh before the fall. I'll say that. I think that's something that a lot of people, especially nowadays, need to hear, because we're on this planet together. You gotta kind of, especially if you're in dire need, accept the help, man. It doesn't matter where it comes from. Accept the help. Also, we have ads. Dang it. I hope that makes sense. I guess that's part of life advice that I never heeded that, and I refused help all the time, and then I got myself in a position where I needed help a lot, and I started accepting help from everybody, and now I'm in a lot better place in life because I listen and accept help whenever I need it, no matter who it's from. Wise counsel is always welcome to foolish I guess counsel as well, but wise counsel is better than foolhardy pride, I guess is the best way to describe that. This kind of goes hand in hand with if you're in a position of power and you don't know how to do something, or you're not the best at the thing that you're doing or running, accepting people who are smarter than you to put in positions of power that can help you out as the leader is always the smartest move, because that shows your intelligence to read the situation, intelligence to read not only your own weaknesses but the strengths of the people around you, which makes you a good leader, honestly. The best leaders that I've met always surround themselves with the best people, no matter who it is. It doesn't matter if it's a military leader, a person at work who's your boss, if it's a group leader in college or in school. I always find that the best leaders always surround themselves with the best people. And if they don't, it's very telling, because there's going to be a very big glaring weakness and you'll be able to see it clear as day. It's really, really obvious. That is genuinely a lesson I need to take to heart, honestly. Yeah, I think everybody needs to take it to heart, honestly. Welcome back from the ads, everybody. Hope your ads weren't too terrible. Welcome back, welcome back. I was taking a little bit to come up with a good question. Hopefully it's not too touchy. How do you think the history of the Catholic Church would have changed if Martin Luther had never existed? I don't think it would have changed much at all, considering I'm fairly certain... Is it John Calvin? Right, John Calvin. Was he before him or after him? I'm trying to remember. Martin Luther, I believe, was after him. Martin Luther. Oh, they're around the same time, I guess. I don't think it would have stopped anything. Martin Luther handing the shit onto the door. This is the thing. You've got to think about it in this way. Does one person really change the future, or is it the one person who finally states his grievances that gets remembered by history? And it's usually the latter. So if you're thinking of this time, all right, Catholic Church seen as very going against what the teachings of Jesus were at the time, going against what people were reading in the Bible now that Gutenberg had invented the printing press and literacy was on the rise in Europe. Now peasants can start to read and understand the book, and now the priests start teaching the book, they're kind of interpreting it in their own way, which then leads to questions about like, where does indulgence from sin come from? Why are we selling off church possessions and giving money to the church to forgive our sins whenever that's like something that wouldn't have been allowed before? Like, where did that come from? Why are we spending so much money on art and architecture and everything for the church? Why are we having a bunch of popes that have been going against what the teachings of Jesus were? You know, like at that time, obviously. So I think John Calvin and Martin Luther are just they're men who took initiative to start the revolutions in their own perspective, like in their own perspective times. And you know, I think there still would have been something. I think the defenestration of Prague would have still happened. The wars in Europe probably would have happened too. Protestantism, there wouldn't have been Lutheranism, and there wouldn't have been like Calvinism if those two hadn't existed. But I mean, I still think you would have had someone else who would be like, why are these teachings like this? Why is it only the going through the church saves you? Why is there like a hierarchy for it? And like these would be questions that are asked of people regardless. It's the same thing that happened with like the Great Schism between the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church, because their big thing was, you know, we have 5 ecumenical councils, right? We have five different heads of the churches. Like the Roman one was the first of equals, right? So there's one in Constantinople, there's one in Rome, there's one in where's Alexandria, I believe. There's one in, I forget what the other places are. There's 2 other ones. I think in Jerusalem and somewhere else. But there's like there's 5 of them. And the Roman one, back in the day before the Great Schism, was seen as like the top one. So what Rome took that as is Roman is the leader of all of them because he is the most important one. Because it's the biggest city, it's got all the influence of the Catholics or the Christians at the time. And then whenever Constantinople gets taken over, and they have like this whole crusade business, it turns into, we're just helping we're not helping fellow Christians, we're taking back the land for Catholics, and saying it's like a whole thing. So it's this is why the Eastern Orthodox split off, is because they still have a council or whatever. They still talk to the Pope, but it's like they make decisions as councils and not as individual people. The Pope is like a king versus like the Eastern Orthodox head would have been like a group, like a junta maybe, like a military junta would be the most apt comparison, or theocracy I guess would be more apt. But it's a council of people instead of just one person, if that makes sense. Sorry, did I answer your question? I hope I answered your question well. Perfectly and honestly, all the added information and context is right now. Okay, cool. Thanks. I just wanted to make sure. Yeah, there's like a lot of examples of stuff like that happens in history, though, where there's like a guy who does like the big event, but he is essentially speaking for groups of people that have already had years of just intolerance, or years of just like being battered down and thrown out of areas to become like the guy, you know what I mean? So, for instance, like, trying to think. Like the founding fathers, like the only reason those guys are so well remembered is because they were the rich. Like, not all of them were like super rich. Most of them were, but like these people were like very well known because they were very well known in politics. They were very rich. They were like in like different political branches in the 13 colonies, or they had been known for revolutionary activities before that. So like Sam Adams is like, or excuse me, not Sam Adams, John Adams is like the guy who defended the Boston Massacre the guys who committed the Boston Massacre, he's the one who defends them and protects them from justice in America, right? So it's like he's the one defending. They shot into a crowd, but obviously the American colonists were throwing rocks and ice and clams at them and stuff, which means that they feared for their life. So whenever somebody said fire, they shot into the crowd, and it was for self-defense. That was his argumentation. That's what they used. But he was really well known for that, which is why he got invited to the congressional, like the American Continental Congress, right? And Sam Adams is his, I think his cousin, I believe. He was the one who orchestrated the Boston Tea Party after the Boston Massacre. So, had that been any other person who orchestrated that, I mean, they would more than likely would have been known to us in America as one of our founding fathers, but they didn't. So even though they might be from that same time, they're not really well known. Even though they probably have the same ideas or opinions as them, then there you have it. Thanks for the question, though. Anybody else? If not, it's okay. Trying to think what to do next, guys. We've been reading for 2.5 hours. Wow, that's crazy. Let me think. Okay, so let's see what to do next. What to do next? I tell you what, let me put you guys on a break real quick because I need to use the bathroom. I'll be back in like 5 minutes, okay? I'll be right back. back, everybody. Hello, hello. Sorry about that. I really need to use the bathroom. Okay. I think I'm gonna reflect on a couple of things, and then we're gonna end. So, um, thanks for everybody who came out and supported today. It's the first ASMR stream that we've done that wasn't like for like a big event, so I appreciate everybody for coming out and showing up. I hope this was enjoyable. I might do some actual ASMR stuff for the channel if you guys are interested into it. Let me know in the suggestion box if you'd like more, or tell me. But yeah, I think what I want to muse on for a little bit here at the end is I'll talk about why history is so important to me just a little bit. I find that as I grow older, I'm 30 years old now. I know I'm an old man. It's okay. You don't have to make fun of me for it. I find as I grow older, the teachings of history, the stories I hear, the lessons I learn, the stories that I see from people of areas that have for years and years and years gone along and had similar things happen to them throughout history. I think the adage that history repeats itself is fairly true, and if it doesn't repeat itself, there's another one that says history doesn't always repeat itself, it rhymes. Either of those is true to me. I think we see it with things happening in the world today. We're seeing the world in the throes of past events that have shaped our future tremendously, especially in especially in war and stuff nowadays. That's why I think is so interesting about it is you can literally trace back old disputes, conflicts, stuff like that from things that happened thousands of years ago. And not only just that, you can learn from it, right? You can see how to interact with certain people, how to, like, things not to talk about, things to talk about. If you meet somebody, you can bring up a historical thing. And I think what I want to do for you all, and I've said this multiple times, but if there's so many new people to the channel today, I feel like I have to emphasize it. History is so interesting to me because it is the story of us, right? So, being able to sit here and learn it and teach you all the history of us, to me, is a great joy because it helps me open up eyes of people who normally probably don't study history, or if they do, might have been taught history differently from me. So I take pride in that. History is obviously taught from different perspectives. There's different angles that you can approach something. There's a correct and an incorrect way to teach history too, in my opinion. But that's for a discussion for another time. But I think the real joy I get out of it is just letting you guys see parts of history that maybe you guys don't normally hear about. We don't teach basic stuff here, right? I try to get an interesting and engaging topic and teach it. We can just go back and look at the multitudes of streams that we've done on the channel. For instance, obviously everybody knows about certain funny things, but do they really know the story of the funny thing? Everybody hears about the Emu War. Did they learn about the Emu War? Well, I would argue no. They don't normally learn about the Emu War, so that's why I would teach a lesson on it. We've had, I don't even know how many tons and tons of streams that we've done for just various different topics. We've done a lesson on D-Day, which is obviously very well covered, but nobody really goes into the topic of what happened behind the lines, what happened to the airborne troopers, and if they do, it's probably because they watch Band of Brothers. The Lance of Longinus or the Spear of Destiny, we've done something on that. We did the Gunpowder Plot, which is a big thing for British people. We've covered, like I said, the Emu War. We've covered the Whiskey Rebellion, which is a very unknown thing to a lot of Americans, but it's hugely important as to why we get taxed today the same way that we do back then as we do now, right? It shows how the federal government now runs things, right, for the American colonies, whereas in the past it was kind of like a lawless land. because of the Articles of Confederation, and now because it's the Constitution and they have more power, now they're seizing the ability to like go and tax people. And how does this affect America going forward? The rise and fall of the samurai. Obviously, not everybody covers the entirety of the rise and fall of the samurai into the Meiji Restoration, but I did. We did the Salem witch trials, which a lot of people don't learn about. Serial killers throughout history, we've done that. We did a history of Halloween, history of Musume. We did a history on the horse racing. But I try to make these lessons as entertaining and interesting to you all as I possibly can, because I want to teach you guys stuff that is maybe outside of the box, right? Because you kind of learn basic things in school, and I think the problem with that is that whenever you learn stuff like this, a lot of the times your teachers aren't interested because they've had to teach it every single year for the last 10, 15, 20 years that they've been teaching people, and they're just not into it anymore. And I think enthusiastically teaching, actually, I'll give you some insight. So from Offkai last year, I don't know if you guys know, my Kami Oshi, is named Cleo IT. Cleo is a former history professor. She has a PhD in history. She is from Australia. She's very, very smart. But she's like my favorite VTuber. I actually got inspired to do history lessons because I watched one of her history lessons. And the thing that I find most interesting about it is whenever I went to Offkai, she gave me some advice. I said, hey, Cleo, I make history lessons. I've rated you a few times. You probably don't remember. I'm a very small channel. But you're my Oshi, and I would really like some advice. How do I reach people on a certain topic? How do I reach people with history? Because I feel like you've done it so well that I don't know how to do it in my own way. And her advice to me was, if you teach something you're interested in, people will come because they see your enthusiasm with it, and they will come and watch you. So I took that to heart, and so I only cover things that I find interesting or cool, right? So, I'm not just going to cover something that I think is like popular at the time, right? Even with the Uma Musume thing, even though that was like popular at the time, I still find it interesting because I like the game, and I am from Kentucky, so I'm already in the horses. You didn't have to convince me to make that, you know what I mean? So it was like one of those things. But I want to keep making stuff that you guys find interesting and entertaining, and that you guys will like, because if you guys find it entertaining and you like it, then hopefully if I keep teaching and teaching, you're going to learn more and more, and then you're going to spread that love of history to other people that hopefully I've helped facilitate within you. And that's my real goal, because I want people to learn the truth. I don't want people to learn, like, especially nowadays, dude, everything is so charged with, like, a bias. I don't want to say what kind of bias, because it's multiple biases, but people will see something that happens in history and they'll be like, look, this is why so-and-so group is evil, or like, look, this is why so-and-so activity is bad, and this, that, and the other. And there's no nuance to the teaching of it. There's no other perspective considered. It's just black and white history, black and white, therefore this X thing is bad. And I'm not saying like, oh, like, go out and like stump for obviously bad people, so please don't take me out of context whenever I say this, but there has been a multitude of people who will go out of their way to use history as a cudgel to beat opponents over the head with, whenever they don't even understand the history itself from the beginning. So like I remember I watched not to get too into the weeds, but I remember I watched an interview with I believe it was like an interview that somebody had did with Putin, and he was like going through like this historical record of like why Poland and Ukraine belong to Russia and like all this other stuff, and then you're like listening to him talk. He's like talking about historical things that happened thousands of years before Ukraine and Poland were even formed as nations, and like all this stuff, but he's like using it as a justification for war and why these people are like subservient to Russians and stuff like that. And it's just like listening to him, and he's like, you're obviously using history as like a way to advance your own stuff, except for that the history he's teaching isn't correct. he's like skipping over thousands of things that happened to these people and their opinions on the Russian people as well, and that there are different groups of people, that they are different in their cultures and their languages and all this other stuff, and therefore are not Russians at heart. They're completely different people. So it's like that. Some things like that, are like stuff that I don't want to have you guys do. I don't want you guys to like listen to like one person and be like, oh, this is the one true truth. But like, yeah, there's different perspectives to look at it, but there is an objective truth in history. There's an objective way of looking at things, and you can form opinions based off the objective truth. But at the end of the day, right, I think teaching the objective truth of history is the objective of all historians. Anyone who tells you that there needs to be an opinion derived from a historical point of view is either trying to advance their own narrative, A, or B, trying to purposefully propagandize for their group, which I think are pretty much the same thing, now that I'm thinking about it out loud. But yeah, either way, they're purposefully misleading people or they're trying to propagandize, which is not good. History is an objective. It's the story of us as a human race. Telling the truth of that sometimes is bitter, sometimes is bad, sometimes is horrible. However, it is the truth of the matter. So no matter how bad it gets, how evil our history gets, how awful it sounds, that doesn't mean that we're irredeemable as a race, or as a I say racism, the human race. That doesn't mean we're irredeemable people, because things change over time. Looking at it through nuance, looking at the situation at the time, and using the historical context of the time to derive our thoughts about it, right? There's an objective, right? And then you derive thoughts based off of that. Yes, that's fine. But writing a book that's like, I give you a great example for this one too. There's this big narrative from vegans nowadays that gladiators, like, gladiators had like this diet that was like vegan, and it's like this very big push thing. They made like an entire documentary about how all these people got all their vitamins and nutrition from like was it lentils? I can't remember what it was. I think it was grains. It was all like plants, except for they didn't account for the fact that these people weren't being served meat, not because they chose to, but because they were forced to not eat meat, and therefore kind of dissuades their narrative that they're trying to push by not listening to it. So that's like one of those things that you really need to like listen to, pay attention to if you're going to study history. What's the context of like why these things are happening? Because people will use it to propagandize. That's a wild name. Good evening. How are you? I'm doing well. How are you? But thank you for the follow. I appreciate it. But if there's anything you learn from me for history teaching and stuff like that, please learn that there is objective truth that you can derive an opinion off of, but don't derive the opinion solely for the purpose of propaganda. Look at what's true and what's not true. Look at things through a historical context and not a presentism context. There's a very bad tilt of that in historians nowadays, where people just look at stuff through a present lens and they're like, this is all awful. And it's like, well, at the time, that's not really how they think about. We don't have modern day thought processes to control 1500s people. Sorry. That's not how that works. But I'm doing very well. That's good. I'm glad you're doing very well. We can't look at things like that. That's just not how we look at things. So my plea to you, dear viewer, dear listener, use your brain. Think critically. Do not look through things through a presentist lens. Use historical context if you're going to study history. Don't just listen to me if I am telling you something, because it's good to get your own view from the data itself. It might be something that maybe I'm just subconsciously doing, and maybe I'm presenting something wrong, or maybe I misspoke on something. So always call out if you have something wrong. Make sure you double check it, right? Um, but yeah, there's Max's quick tips on historical stuff. Why I do what I do. I'm gonna keep trying to make content for you guys. That's gonna be entertaining and something that I think you guys hopefully will follow and enjoy. And I like teaching. I like teaching history. I think history is a very important thing for us. I like history. I think it's entertaining. I've liked it since I was a kid, and now I'm in my 30s. God, that's so weird to say. Um, I still can't get over that. I've been 30 for like 4 months now. I still can't get over that. But now that I'm in my 30s, I think going back and looking at like all the stuff that I got taught, and like going back and relearning a lot of the stuff, it's like, wow, we get taught different history today than we did back whenever I was a kid. Like very different stuff, very different stuff. Oh, dropped something. Sorry guys, but hope that made sense. It sounds like I was kind of went on a ramble. Sorry if I sounded like a madman there, guys. I'm so sorry. I'm just trying to get my point across, I guess. But anyways, hope you enjoyed. Hope you liked the reading today. If you guys did, please feel free to join that Discord link right there that just popped up. We do have a community. Not a madman, just a Mad Max. Okay, alright then. If you did enjoy the content, please feel free to go join our Discord there. It's a nice place. We have a good community. I'm hoping someone will pick up the mantle and become our new anime night / movie night person. But we will see what happens with that. That should be soon. Outside of that, though, guys, if you guys haven't followed me on socials yet, I do have socials, and we do have big things coming down the pipeline soon. We got a new video coming on Wednesday. We've got history lesson next weekend. I forgot to tell you guys. I don't remember if it's gonna be Friday or Saturday, but history lesson probably Saturday. I think it's Saturday. I think Friday I want to play some Resident Evil 6, or not 6, 9. Resident Evil 9's coming out, so Friday Resident Evil 9, Saturday history lesson, Sunday Shrug. We are 2, not RE6, RE9, 9, RE9. Resident Evil 9 Requiem, not 6. Good Lord, not 6. Never 6. Also, we're 2 people away from 750 followers. So if 2 people who are watching who have not followed yet follow, we're at 750. That would be a huge milestone. But you don't have to if you don't want to. I am kind of a boring person. I get it. It's okay. You don't have to. Don't feel pressured. Outside of that, though, we will see what happens. Doc, you already fucking follow me, you dumbass. You know you're gonna get reset, and I'm never gonna remember when the fucking wrong. Okay. You just unfollow me every time you watch me, I guess. Makes sense. Okay. Got it. Very interesting. Oh my goodness gracious. I'll remember. Uh-huh. Sure. Sure you will. Anyways. What was I saying? New video Wednesday. Resident Evil 9 on Friday. Saturday, history lesson. Don't know what on yet. Probably one of the ones that our people picked for us. And then Sunday, maybe Rogue Trader? I'm thinking Rogue Trader. I think Rogue Trader will go back to that. I'm enjoying that quite a bit. I might not voice act as much in Rogue Trader. I'm going to be honest. We took like an hour and a half for voice acting last time, and it took all of my time up. And I wanted to keep shooting people, and I couldn't go shoot people because I was voice acting so much. So I guess we'll take it, dial it back a few notches, which is fine. It's okay. It's not a big deal. It looks like you guys really like the ASMR, though. You guys really turned out today. I appreciate it. Thank you guys so much. It's my first time doing ASMR, so I hope you all enjoyed. We read history, talked about some history. talked about me, talked about you, gave some life advice, did a little bit of everything today, I think. Now then, question is, who do we raid out to, guys? Do we want to stay with ASMR? Or do we want to go to one of our friends who's streaming? Which I don't know if there's anyone even on right now. I think Snacks is streaming right now, but... Sass is streaming? Yeah, but I think we rated her last time, I think. I don't want to be the guy who raids only one person every week, you know what I mean? Let's see. Who do we got? We got a few people. Haha. Wait, should we raid Jets? Do you guys would you guys allow me to raid one of my favorite streamers? Would you guys be cool with that? Can I take you over to one of my favorite streamers, Jets? Sure. You guys won't kill me? Okay, good. Alright, we're gonna raid Jets then. I really like Jets. Gene Famous. Very cool. Tomboy VTuber from Australia. Friend of Cleo's. Same, I don't know, I guess a group for Cheyenne. For Cheyenne Girl. Love her content though. Met her at Offkai. Got to talk to her for a little bit. Alright, here we go. Here's the thing. Guys, if you want to follow us with the raid, there's the message right there. If you're a subscriber though, use the raid 2 message here. Make sure you copy that down. Join us in raiding Jets. She is playing Peak solo, I think, right now. I think she's solo peeking it. So enjoy your time over there. I know it's going to be a jump scare. If you're in ASMR mode right now and you cannot hear me, be aware she is not in ASMR. She does not do ASMR, so just FYI. Just FYI. She is doing Peak. So enjoy your time with Jean. I will see you guys on Friday. Enjoy the short on Wednesday. I love you all. Remember, you're always loved, respected, and welcome here at our little school on this side of the internet. And guys, we'll see you in the next one. Peace out, Girl Scout. Bye-bye. Peace out. Goodbye.